You've pulled back from people, and you're not entirely sure when it started. Maybe it was gradual, the social invitations that you stopped accepting, the conversations that started feeling shallow, the gatherings where you sat in a full room and felt completely alone. Maybe it happened faster than that, one season where everything suddenly felt distant and you haven't found your way back since. And the part that confuses you most isn't the isolation itself. It's that you can't fully blame anyone for it. People haven't necessarily wronged you. Life hasn't necessarily fallen apart. It's something quieter than that. Something harder to explain. It feels almost like you were moved. Like something pulled you inward and hasn't released you yet. And in the middle of it, in the middle of the quiet and the distance and the hours you've spent alone with your own thoughts, a question formed. One you've been almost afraid to ask because asking it out loud makes it too real. Is God doing this to me? You're not losing your mind. You're not being dramatic. You are not the only person who has ever sat in this exact silence asking this exact question. But what if the answer is yes, and that yes is the most loving thing He has ever said to you? Truth 1. God has always used isolation as an instrument of formation. This is not a new thing He is doing. This is an ancient pattern. Look at the life of Moses. Before the burning bush, before the plagues, before the parting of the Red Sea, there were 40 years of silence. 40 years tending sheep in Midian. The man who would speak to Pharaoh first had to spend 4 decades where almost no one was listening. The silence was not punishment for killing the Egyptian. The silence was preparation for a voice that would carry the weight of God's words to an empire. Look at John the Baptist. Luke 1-80 records something that most people read past. It says he lived in the wilderness until he appeared publicly to Israel. He didn't drift into the desert. He lived there, intentionally, in preparation, until the moment God released him to speak. The pattern is unmistakable. Before the word, the wilderness. Before the ministry, the margin. Before the message, the silence that shapes the messenger. C.S. Lewis wrote that God, who foresaw your tribulation, has specially armed you to go through it, not to go around it. The isolation you are in right now is not a gap in your story, it is armor being fitted. And armor cannot be fitted while you are still in motion. Truth number 2. Isolation breaks your dependency on human validation, because what's coming requires a foundation nothing human can provide. Here is the truth no one says from the platform on Sunday. Most of us, without realizing it, have built our spiritual confidence on a foundation of other people's affirmation. We feel close to God when the community around us is thriving. We feel strong in our faith when the people we respect reflect that faith back to us. We feel certain of our calling when voices around us confirm it, and then the isolation comes. The voice is quiet. The affirmation dries up. The community disperses. And suddenly the faith that felt so real when it was surrounded by witnesses feels fragile when it has to stand alone. But this is exactly the point. Galatians 1:11-12. Paul writes, I want you to know, brothers and sisters, that the gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Jesus Christ. Paul's theology was not assembled from community consensus. It was forged in isolation. In the 3 years after his Damascus Road encounter, he did not go to Jerusalem to consult the apostles. He went to Arabia, alone, to receive directly. What God is trying to build in you cannot be handed to you by another person. It must be revealed to you directly. And revelation requires the kind of quiet that crowds cannot produce. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote that the person who cannot stand alone in the presence of God will misuse their relationship with others. That solitude is not the enemy of community. It is the training ground for the kind of community that actually transforms people. The isolation is not separating you from your destiny. It is separating you from a dependency that would have undermined it. Truth number 3. The discomfort of isolation is exposing what was always there, and God needs you to see it. This next one is the hardest to hear, but it may be the most important. When the noise of social life is removed, when the calendar empties and the distractions thin out, what surfaces is not always comfortable. Old fears come up, unresolved grief rises. Patterns of thought you didn't know you carried become impossible to ignore. And the temptation is to fill the silence immediately. to reach for anything that drowns out what's surfacing. But God allowed it to surface for a reason. Psalm 139-23 and 24. David writes, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting." This prayer is not comfortable theology. It is an invitation for God to reveal what the busyness of life was covering. And God, in His mercy, sometimes answers that prayer not with a vision, but with a season of stillness that makes the hidden things visible. The anxiety you feel in the silence is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that God is doing the deep work. The work that cannot happen on the surface. The work that requires going down before you can go forward. John Owen, the great Puritan theologian, wrote that the soul that does not know its own depths will not know the depths of God's grace. The isolation is the excavation, and you cannot build on ground that has not been cleared. Truth 4. God isolates the ones He is about to trust with something significant. Look at the pattern one more time, but this time look at what came after the isolation. Moses came out of the wilderness and stood before Pharaoh. John the Baptist came out of the desert and prepared the way for the Son of God. Paul came out of Arabia and wrote half the New Testament. Jesus Himself, 40 days alone in the wilderness, and then 3 years that changed the entire arc of human history. The isolation was not the story. It was the preparation for the story. Isaiah 49:2, God says of His servant, "He made my mouth like a sharpened sword, in the shadow of His hand He hid me. He made me into a polished arrow and concealed me in His quiver." Concealed in His quiver. Hidden in the shadow of His hand. That is not abandonment language. That is warfare language. An arrow is not placed in the quiver because it is forgotten. It is placed there because it is being held in reserve for a moment that requires exactly what it carries. You are not being shelved, you are being held, and the hand holding you knows exactly when to release you and exactly where you need to land. Truth number 5. The isolation ends, but only when the formation is complete. This is the one that brings everything together. You want to know when this season ends. That is a legitimate question. And the honest answer is, when the work it was sent to do is finished. Ecclesiastes 3:1. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A season has a beginning, a season has an end. This is not your permanent address. This is a corridor, and corridors lead somewhere. But the length of the corridor is determined not by your calendar, but by God's completion. The question is not, when does this end? The question is, what is God finishing in me, and am I cooperating with it? Because the believer who fights the isolation prolongs it. But the believer who surrenders to it, who stops trying to force their way back into the noise, that believer comes out of it carrying something that cannot be manufactured any other way. I need you to sit with something for a moment. The fact that you search for this, that you type those words into a search bar at whatever hour it is where you are, that tells me something about you. You are not passive in this season. You are seeking. You are still reaching toward God even when you can't feel Him reaching back. You are still asking questions in a season where it would have been easier to go numb. That is not spiritual weakness. That is one of the most active forms of faith there is. The enemy wants this season to produce bitterness. He wants the isolation to convince you that you are forgotten, that God moved on while you were standing still, that everyone else is thriving while you are stuck in a silence you didn't choose. He wants the loneliness to become a wall instead of a door. But a forgotten person doesn't ache for God. A discarded person doesn't search for meaning in the silence. The very hunger you carry in this season, that hunger is evidence that you were made for something more than this. That God placed that hunger in you, and that He intends to satisfy it. You are not a casualty of this season. You are a candidate for something this season is producing. The arrow in the quiver is not wasted. It is waiting. And there is a difference between waiting that wastes and waiting that prepares. You are being prepared. Let's bring this to God right now, together. Father, for every person in this season of isolation, every person who has felt the quiet press in too heavy, who has wondered if they were forgotten, who has searched for your face in a season that has offered very little evidence that you are near, meet them in this moment. Not tomorrow, right now. Let them feel, not just intellectually believe, but genuinely feel that you are present in the silence, that you are the one who called them into this corridor, that this is not an accident, and this is not a punishment, and this is not the end. Give them the grace to stop fighting the season and start asking what the season is teaching. And give them the courage to trust that the arrow in your hand is never placed there carelessly. Amen. If this reached something in you today, if it named something you have been carrying alone, type the word hidden in the comments right now, because that is where you are. Hidden in his hand, held in his quiver. Seen even in the silence. And if someone you know is in this season, someone who has gone quiet, pulled back, withdrawn from everything without fully being able to explain why, share this with them. They may need someone to name it before they can bear it. This channel exists for the seasons that don't have easy answers, for the searches that happen in the dark, for the believers who are still holding on when holding on is all they have left. Subscribe and come back. We go deep here. We don't pretend the hard seasons aren't hard. And carry this out of today with you. God does not isolate carelessly. He isolates intentionally. And what he is building in the silence is worth every moment the silence cost you. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. And formation always precedes the moment everything finally makes sense.